Hey guys, tonight we slip into a version of France that never really goes to sleep. A place where the shutters are half closed, the radios are half silent, and you learn to breathe like someone is always listening on the other side of the wall. You are not a soldier in uniform. You are just one more villager in worn shoes, moving through a landscape that now smells of coal smoke, cabbage soup, and fear. It starts, for you, in the dark. You lie awake in a narrow bed, the rough sheet twisted around your legs, listening to boots on the cobblestones outside your window. The sound is heavy and rhythmic, metal studs on stone, a marching pattern that does not belong to your village but has taken it anyway. The German occupation has only just settled in, but already the streets understand that they are no longer yours. The curfew is real, the fines are real, the rifles are very real. Your little town is the kind of place that, a few years ago, would have shown up only as a dot on a map, if at all. Now it is part of a conquered zone that stretches from the Atlantic to the borders of Germany, divided carefully into zones of control, like someone has taken a ruler to the country and declared that history will follow straight lines. Officially, life goes on. The bakery opens, the school bell rings, the church still holds mass. Unofficially, everything is slightly crooked. People lower their voices when they get near open windows. A new sign in German hangs over the mairie. A portrait of Marshal Pétain looks down from the wall, the eyes following you in a way that is definitely not relaxing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You hear the boots fade and then stop. A truck door slams. Somewhere nearby, a dog growls, then remembers that barking at men with guns is not a good career choice. The air tastes of damp stone and wood smoke. You stare at the ceiling and think about how quickly normal life can shrink. Only a few months ago, you worried about exams, or the price of flour, or whether your neighbor was stealing your chickens. Now you worry about whether keeping an extra radio hidden in the barn will get your whole family arrested. By 1940, when France surrenders, millions of people are watching their world rearrange itself in a matter of weeks, and the statistics sound almost unreal when you try to picture them from your quiet bed. Whole armies captured, vast stretches of territory occupied, and the French government relocating, while people like you have to decide if you will bend, break, or quietly push back. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly understood how long the occupation might last, or whether everyone clung to a secret hope that this would all somehow blow over by Christmas. You get out of bed because lying still makes your thoughts too loud. Your bare feet touch cold floorboards. The house creaks in that old familiar way. But tonight, every creak feels like a possible clue to someone outside. It is late, but not entirely silent. Far away, you hear a train whistle, thin and lonely. You have already learned that trains matter now in a different way. They carry troops, supplies, prisoners, and sometimes rumors. People in your village have started quietly noting when they pass and from which direction, like amateur railway detectives who pretend they are just bored farmers. In the kitchen, your mother leaves a candle stub on the table, a little pool of yellow light that seems almost indecently bright in this new, dim world. There is a pot of chicory coffee, which is a kind way of saying brown liquid that smells almost like the real thing if you close your eyes and use your imagination. You pour some anyway, because pretending is its own kind of courage. You wrap your hands around the chipped mug and listen to the muffled clink of bottles from the bar across the square, where German soldiers drink and laugh in a language that sounds sharp and hurried to your ears. One odd detail that you will only appreciate later is how much paperwork it takes to conquer a country. The occupiers print new forms, new permits, new identity cards. They stamp things and sign things and demand that everyone line up to be measured, registered, and checked. Even in a small village, you learn that the real battlefields can sometimes be offices with typewriters and ink pads. Somewhere, clerks file away documents that turn living people into lines on lists, and it is both boring and horrifying at the same time. You stand by the small window and peel back the curtain just enough to see the square. A German truck is parked near the fountain, its canvas cover sagging like a tired face. Two soldiers smoke cheap cigarettes, the glow of the tips pulsing in the dark. Another leans against the truck and hums a tune that you do not recognize, his helmet tilted back. They look young, annoyingly young, as if they should be worrying about the same exams you did, not carrying rifles that could end your story. You feel a strange mixture of emotions, and none of them are tidy. There is anger, obviously. that someone else is suddenly in charge of your life. There is fear, cold and deliberate, that sits under your ribs like a stone. There is also a prickling curiosity. Somewhere inside you, a small voice asks what would happen if you did not simply accept this as the new normal. It is the same voice that used to talk you into minor mischief, like sneaking extra pastries from the bakery or climbing the school roof. That voice has not realized that the stakes have changed. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night presses close against the glass, and you finally understand that danger is no longer a distant thing you read about in newspapers. It is the shape of the helmet by the truck, the glint of a bayonet, the gentlest knock on a door after curfew. It is the knowledge that even thinking about resistance is dangerous, yet the thought has already arrived and refuses to leave. Morning arrives with grey light and the smell of bread, one of the last reliable comforts you still trust. You join the line outside the bakery, ration card in hand, telling yourself this is just another day in a world that has misplaced the idea of normal. People talk about weather and turnips instead of arrests, the way someone might discuss curtains instead of the fire creeping up the wall. Inside, oven heat wraps around you after the streets chill. Flour dust hangs in the air. The baker, who once told bad jokes and handed extra crusts to children, now moves with tight efficiency, eyes sliding toward the door as if he expects uniforms at any moment. The loaves are darker, bulked out with strange grains. In occupied France, strict rationing lets the authorities control daily meals, and everyone quietly learns what it feels like to be a little hungry all the time. When your turn comes, you hand over the card. The baker takes it with hands that look thick and steady, but his fingers tremble just a little as he presses a loaf into your grasp. The bread is warm and rough. On the underside, where no one else can see, something hard nudges your skin. You keep your face blank. The loaf slides into your basket in a movement as casual as you can make it. The little bell above the door jingles as you walk out, and the sound feels unusually loud. You do not speed up, because moving too quickly is suspicious. You do not slow down, because that is suspicious too. You settle on a careful, boring pace, the sort of walk that says you have absolutely nothing on your mind except perhaps soup. In a narrow side alley, behind a stack of crates, you lift the bread and peel back the crust. A folded scrap of paper clings to the warm interior, no bigger than a matchbox. Your heart starts hammering hard enough that you feel it in your ears. You slip the note into your sleeve, push the crust back, and head home. German road signs now point toward distant cities, filling even this tiny place with directions in an unwanted language. You do not open the note until the curtains are drawn. In the kitchen, a kettle murmurs on the stove, and the table is scrubbed so clean it shines. Your mother hums while she tidies, trying to build a bubble of normalcy with soap and habit. The radio in the corner murmurs careful news, heavy on statistics and light on hope. You unfold the paper and smooth it flat. The handwriting is small and tidy, the letters pressed close together like they are hiding. If you want to help, come to the mill after nightfall. No name, no signature, no stamp. In the corner, 2 tiny lines cross in a symbol you do not recognize, simple enough to be dismissed as a stray mark by anyone not looking for meaning. Someone went to the trouble of sliding this into your bread. That alone says everything. Across occupied France, small resistance groups begin to form around teachers, priests, ex-soldiers, students, printers, anyone who cannot stand the sight of enemy flags. At first they are scattered and clumsy. Historians still argue whether these early efforts deserve the name network, or are better described as pockets of stubbornness that only later learn to coordinate. You gaze at the note, and 2 versions of your life sit side by side. In one, you ignore the invitation, keep queuing for bread, keep your head down, hope the war stays politely outside your front door. In the other, you go to the mill. You step into a world of aliases, passwords, and secrets. The second version is terrifying. The first suddenly feels worse. You fold the paper and slip it into the lining of your jacket. The movement is small, but it feels like picking up a weapon. For the rest of the day, ordinary tasks feel flimsy, like cardboard scenery. You peel potatoes, fetch water, sweep the floor. Your hands move, but part of you stands already in the dark near the river, listening for footsteps. When someone mentions a new regulation about travel permits, you nod at the right moment, but your thoughts circle back to 6 handwritten words. If you want to help, You keep wondering who wrote them. The baker? A neighbor? Someone you usually think of as dull and predictable? Resistance has a talent for revealing hidden rooms inside ordinary people. You hear quiet stories of schoolchildren carrying messages in hollow pencils, and farmers hiding weapons under hay. A secret world is taking shape inside the visible one, like writing in lemon juice waiting for heat. The tricky part is that no one ever warns you about the smell of onion juice when you test homemade invisible ink. When evening deepens, you tell your family you need some air. It is not a complete lie. Your chest feels tight, and the house suddenly seems too small. They accept it with the tired nod people use in difficult times. As long as you are back before curfew, as long as you do not cause trouble. Outside, the village softens into blue. You walk toward the edge of town, taking a route that feels casual but chosen. A German patrol passes at the far end of the street, boots clicking in rhythm. You glance away, pretending to study a shop doorway, and feel their gaze slide over you. The mill crouches near the river, its wheel long still. In peacetime, it was simply part of the scenery, a place where children dared each other to climb, and old men sat to smoke. Tonight it feels like the edge of a map, where printed details fade into blank space. You move down the path, reeds brushing your legs. You tell yourself this is still your village, still your river, still your right to walk here. But another part of you counts heartbeats. Near the doorway, a shape detaches itself from the darkness. It is a familiar face, someone whose name you have spoken 100 times in boring daylight conversations. A neighbor, a shopkeeper, a person you never imagined as anything more than background. They nod once, serious now, and in that small gesture you understand that the note in the bread was not a mistake. You have arrived at the threshold of a life that officially does not exist. Inside the mill, the air smells of damp stone, river water, and old flour. Someone has swept the floor, but dust still swirls in the lantern light. A small group waits, faces turned toward you with a kind of polite curiosity, as if you are auditioning for a role you did not know you wanted. No one asks if you are sure. A woman in a plain dress, with ink stains on her fingers, steps forward. She looks like any ordinary shopkeeper, someone who might lecture you about tracking mud into her store. Her voice is calm when she speaks, but you can feel the current underneath. You give your name automatically, the one printed on your birth certificate. She shakes her head. Not anymore, she says. That is how it starts. You learn quickly that resistance work is part theatre, part paperwork, and part not panicking when authority stares you in the face. The movement needs people who can carry information, hide people, forge documents, sabotage rail lines. Before any of that, it needs people who can lie without making it obvious they are holding their breath. They sit you at a rough wooden table where a single lamp pools light. A small stack of forms lies beside an inkwell, the official grey-green of occupation bureaucracy. On top, there is an identity card that is not yours, but could be, if you learn the story printed on it well enough. The ink-fingered woman hands you the card. It bears a new name, a different birthplace, a profession that you have never practiced. A neat photograph looks back at you, slightly off-center. The picture is yours, but the life attached to it is not. Your task is simple, at least on paper. Memorize this new self until it feels like a coat you can shrug into whenever needed. You repeat the details out loud. Name, date of birth, parents, address, job. The others listen, occasionally correcting you when you stumble. It feels like cramming for an exam, except the examiner might carry a pistol and have a talent for noticing sweat. Across occupied France, forging papers becomes an art and a science. People learn to mimic official stamps with carved rubber, to age documents with tea and careful folding, to copy signatures after staring at them until their eyes blur. One mainstream fact that often surprises people later is how much the resistance relied on stolen typewriters and looted official templates, taken from town halls and police offices when no one was looking. You practice until you can recite your new details while counting backwards, while sipping the bitter chicory coffee they hand you, even while someone interrupts with questions. Where were you on the night of the last air raid? What street does your supposed apartment face? What is the name of the grocer across from you? You have never seen that grocer, but now you must describe him. There is an odd little exercise they use to check your composure. One of the older members, a retired teacher who looks like he should be grading essays instead of planning sabotage, leans close and stares into your eyes without blinking. Then, he He suddenly slams his palm on the table and demands your false name at the top of his voice. The first time he does it, you nearly spill your drink. The second time, you manage to keep your tone steady when you answer. By the third, you are starting to find it annoyingly theatrical, which they take as a good sign. Here and there, amid the grim lessons, small absurdities creep in, because humans cannot help themselves. At one point, someone produces a box of moustaches cut from old horsehair. The idea is to see how much ridiculousness you can wear on your face while still behaving as if nothing is out of place. You try one that refuses to sit straight and end up looking like a villain from a bad film. The room snorts with suppressed laughter. Even in dangerous times, people still appreciate a truly terrible moustache. Quirky details cling to these secret evenings. Someone always brings a single bar of chocolate, carefully broken into tiny squares for everyone to share. The radio in the corner is covered with a cloth, as if that will make it less illegal. A battered copy of a detective novel circulates between meetings, stuffed with coded marks that look like readers' notes, but are actually references to drop points and rendezvous times. Historians still argue whether such improvised systems were genuinely efficient or whether nostalgia later makes them sound more elegant than they actually were in the confusion of real life. You learn how to carry yourself in public. The key, they tell you, is to look neither hurried nor hesitant. Nervous people hurry. Guilty people hesitate. You aim for a careful middle, the pace of someone thinking about a shopping list, not about the false travel pass in their pocket. They teach you to build casual lies on top of your new identity, small stories you can use to distract a bored guard. You are visiting an aunt. You are on your way to buy machine parts. You are returning from helping a cousin with a sick child. Each story has just enough detail to sound real without being so specific that it can be easily checked. You practice in pairs. One of you plays the guard, leaning against a doorway, arms folded, eyes narrowed. The other approaches with a paper in hand and a heart pounding under their shirt. You must learn how to smile without flinching, how to shrug without looking rehearsed, how to answer questions in a tone that says, "You have answered them a dozen times already, and really need to get going if you are going to make it home before the soup burns." At some point during the training, the ink-fingered woman presses a simple phrase into your mind. Never volunteer extra information. Answer what you are asked, nothing more. People under stress, she explains, often babble. Babbling gives clever interrogators hooks to pull on. You do not want to offer hooks. You also learn the art of carrying secrets in your head instead of your hands. Written messages can be found. Pockets can be searched. Memory is harder to confiscate. They give you short phrases, coded addresses, train times, all to be memorized and delivered aloud. It feels like learning lines for a play that may never be performed, except that in this performance, forgetting a cue can have consequences far beyond an awkward silence. By the end of the night, you are exhausted in a new way. Your muscles are fine, your feet still work. It is your mind that feels stretched, like a piece of cloth pulled over too large a frame. Walking back through the sleeping village, you try out your new name quietly, under your breath. The sound is strange at first, then less so. You wonder how many versions of you exist now. The child at this address, the quiet villager in occupied France, and this new, unnamed part that has learned to lie with a straight face because telling the truth has become too dangerous. Your first mission arrives in a way that feels almost insulting in its simplicity. After weeks of learning false names, practicing poker faces, and trying on that ridiculous horsehair moustache, all they ask you to carry is a basket and a smile. You sit at the same rough table in the mill while the ink-stained woman explains. A liaison in a nearby town needs information by tonight. The radios are watched too closely there. Written messages can be intercepted, so the message will live in one place only, your head. No clever hiding place in a loaf, no hollow heel, no coded postcard. Just memory, nerves, and your best attempt at looking like someone whose greatest ambition is to buy vegetables. The message itself is short. A time, a place, and a description of a German supply convoy that will be vulnerable if attacked at the right moment. You repeat it back until they are satisfied you could mutter it in your sleep without getting anything wrong. It feels strange that something so small in length can be so heavy in consequences. Across occupied France, checkpoints multiply like mushrooms after rain, each staffed by men who are under orders to spot the unusual and the nervous. Identity papers, Ausweis, travel permits, All are demanded on roads that used to be just dusty tracks between fields. It is a plain historical fact that by 1942, a simple train journey might involve showing your documents several times, sometimes to German soldiers, sometimes to collaborationist French police, who know exactly how locals usually behave. Your mission keeps you on foot, which is supposed to be less conspicuous. You walk out of the village with a basket on your arm, one bottle of watered wine, and a cloth-wrapped bundle of bread and cheese inside, just enough to make the story believable. You are supposedly visiting a sick aunt who does not in fact exist. You know her address, the imaginary cough, and the colour of the blankets on her imaginary bed, in case anyone gets creative with their questions. The road curves through fields where crops look stunted. War has a way of shrinking everything except fear. In the distance, you hear the faint grind of engines and a single dog barking, then giving up. A cart rattles by, the driver lifting 2 fingers from the reins, in a gesture that might mean greeting, might mean good luck, or might simply mean there is straw dust in his eye. A small wooden barrier appears ahead, painted in that dull colour that looks like it was mixed from leftover mud and boredom. 2 German soldiers and 1 French gendarme stand there, stopping anyone whose day was foolish enough to bring them this way. A little hut squats beside the road like a sulking toad. Someone has tried to improve it with a flower pot. The plant inside looks as defeated as everyone else. Your heart gives a firm thud against your ribs. You slow your breathing, straighten your shoulders, and remind your face that it is supposed to belong to a person whose greatest concern is whether the aunt prefers goat cheese or cow. As you get closer, you slide your identity card between your fingers, ready to present it with casual annoyance. Casual annoyance is useful. It makes you look like someone inconvenienced, not someone terrified. 1 soldier steps forward. He is young, jaw still soft, helmet slightly crooked. He looks like he should be worrying about school, not subversion. His French is stiff, but understandable. He asks where you are going. You deliver your line about the sick aunt, adding a tiny sigh for flavour. You pray that there is not, by some cruel coincidence, a real aunt of that name in the next town, famous for robust health and a very loud laugh. He glances at your card, frowns at the photo, then at your face. For a moment, you imagine every possible disaster. Maybe the ink on the papers is too fresh. Maybe the typeface is wrong. Maybe your ears look different in the picture. Historians still argue whether the average checkpoint guard was genuinely thorough or mostly bored and more interested in finishing a cigarette than spotting forged accents on letters. He hands the card back with a shrug and waves you through. Your knees nearly give out with relief, but you keep the same mildly annoyed expression, as if you are already thinking about the soup simmering on this imaginary aunt's stove. It feels astonishing that something as fragile as acting can protect you from something as solid as a rifle. Beyond the checkpoint, your step wobbles at first. The road ahead feels both shorter and longer now, as if passing that little hut has shifted the scale of the world. A lark sings overhead, oblivious to paperwork and patrols. You find it mildly offensive that a bird can improvise a song while you had to rehearse a 2-sentence lie for half a night. On the way, you pass a woman knitting on a bench near a crossroads, grey hair tucked under a scarf. She barely glances up as you walk by, but the pattern in her hands is strangely complex. Later, someone will tell you that resistance groups sometimes use knitting as code, slipping information into purl and plain stitches. One quirky detail passed around after the war is that certain scarf patterns may have recorded train schedules and patrol numbers, though it is hard to prove now in a world where most of those scarves have quietly worn out. You reach the next town in early afternoon. It looks like yours, only slightly larger and more tired. Posters peel from walls. A German notice announces a new curfew time. Children play anyway, their shouts bouncing off stone. You make your way to a small square where a fountain trickles half-heartedly, then to a café with curtains pulled halfway down. Inside, the air smells of coffee substitute, wet wool, and a faint undercurrent of fear that even scrubbing cannot erase. You order a drink you do not really want. The owner nods and sets a cracked cup on the counter. The person you are supposed to meet sits in the corner, reading a newspaper upside down. It is the agreed signal, absurd enough to stand out without looking like anything an agent training manual would ever recommend. You cross the room, cup in hand, and pretend to study the headline. Your voice is low, just above a whisper, when you give the first half of the code phrase. Something about the weather that sounds like small talk but is not. The stranger replies with the second half, equally bland. It feels ridiculous and deadly serious at the same time. like playing a children's game with someone who happens to have a pistol under their coat. You sit, and under the cover of clinking china and murmured conversation, you relay the memorized details. You do not embellish. You do not explain. You simply give the time, the place, the description of the convoy. The listener's face remains neutral, but their fingers tighten slightly around the cup handle. That tiny movement confirms that your words matter. In the corner, the radio crackles with music allowed by the sensors, something light and cheerful that seems to belong to another planet. You have a sudden, absurd thought that if you mispronounced one number, you might have doomed an entire ambush. You swallow, keep your tone even, and finish the message. The listener nods once. You are done. That is all. No dramatic speeches, no secret handshake, no envelope pushed across the table. Just a half-finished drink, a quiet exchange, and a promise that something will happen later on a road you will not see. You step back onto the street, feeling oddly hollow. For everyone else, you are just one more person with a basket of food. Only you know that you also carried a map of destruction in your head, delivered now to a mind that will pass it on to others. Somewhere, explosives will be packed, men will move under cover of darkness, and a convoy will roll into a bad moment. On the walk home, you find yourself wondering whether this is what heroism actually feels like. Sweaty palms, a dry mouth, and an overwhelming urge to yawn, because your body does not understand that today has been anything special. It turns out that the dangerous life of a resistance fighter can look, from the outside, almost comically ordinary. The news of the convoy attack reaches you only as a rumor, carried on the same breeze that brings the smell of manure and wood smoke into the village. Someone heard that something exploded near a crossroads. Someone heard that a German truck ended up in a ditch. Someone heard that no one important was hurt, which is how the enemy always describes any damage that is not directly done to them. You are not told details. You are told only that the information you carried was useful. That knowledge settles under your ribs like a small, solid stone. It stays there when, a few days later, the ink-stained woman summons you back to the mill and lays out a different kind of task. This time, you will not carry words, you will carry fire. On the table sits a canvas bag that looks disappointingly ordinary. Inside are explosives, fuses, and a coil of wire, all packed with the casual care of someone who has done this far too often. You reach in and touch one of the blocks. It feels cold and dense, the weight of possibilities. You imagine dropping the bag in the street and have to pull your hand away. Tonight, you are going to a railway line. Railways are lifelines in wartime. They move troops, fuel, ammunition, and prisoners. In occupied France, German logistics depend heavily on trains that crisscross the country like steel veins. One mainstream historical fact is that by 1943 and 1944, the resistance, often guided and supplied by British Special Operations Executive, runs a coordinated campaign of rail sabotage that seriously disrupts German movements, especially around the time of the Allied invasion. Your objective is small in the grand scheme. One stretch of track, one scheduled supply train, one carefully timed blast to bend steel and throw timetables into chaos. You are told that the target train is not carrying civilians, only fuel and equipment. The words "only fuel" sound strange when you picture the fire. At dusk, you leave the village on foot, a bicycle at your side to complete the picture of a late ride. Curfew is still a concern, but the route you are taking keeps you away from main roads. The canvas bag sits in the bicycle basket, covered by a folded blanket and a pair of clumsy wooden shoes that look convincingly dull. You have never been so aware of the rattle of spokes. The path leads past fields where silhouettes of haystacks stand like sleepy sentries. Bats flicker in and out of the darkening sky. Somewhere, a dog barks 3 times, pauses, then barks twice more. It could be nothing. It could be a pre-arranged signal. The resistance loves simple patterns that blend into village life, counting on the occupiers never quite learning all the small sounds of a country they do not love. You meet your team near a copse of trees, far from any farmhouse. There are 4 of you tonight. The retired teacher, who seems to have swapped red ink for explosives with alarming ease. A young mechanic, sleeves rolled up, whose hands know every bolt and gear in half the tractors in the region. And a quiet farm girl, who could carry 2 full milk churns without losing her breath. She is the one who takes the bag from your bicycle as if it holds potatoes. You move together through the trees, toward the faint gleam of moonlight on rails. The railway line cuts across the landscape with blunt confidence, a pair of dark lines that do not care about hedges or hills. You drop flat when the teacher raises his hand. In the distance, you hear the hum of an engine, then the fade of it. A patrol on the road, not on the tracks. Close enough to make your heart tighten, far enough that they will not see you if you stay low. At the embankment, the mechanic and the teacher go to work, backs bent over cold metal. You crouch nearby with the farm girl, watching the line of the horizon, listening for engines, footsteps, anything. The smell of damp soil rises around you, mixed with grease from the tracks. It is too quiet. You almost miss the chaos of the cafe. The charges are small but precisely placed, fixed to the rails where they will do maximum damage without turning the entire countryside into a crater. The mechanic explains, in that too calm voice people use to keep themselves steady, that you are not trying to blow the train sky high. You are trying to damage the rails so that wheels twist, axles break, and the carriages buckle. A crippled train is more disruptive than one reduced to ashes, because it clogs the line and demands a long, complicated cleanup. You nod as if you are taking notes in a classroom, although the only notebook you have tonight is your nervous system. For a timing device, they have a simple chemical fuse, the kind of gadget that looks like a school experiment gone rogue. In some parts of France, resistance fighters improvise with strange combinations of fertilizer, sugar, and stolen chemicals, creating slow-burning triggers that can be set long before a train arrives. One quirky story you hear suggests that somewhere, someone even experimented with using a fat snail crawling across a contact strip to close a circuit, although historians still argue whether that tale is brilliant truth or just post-war folklore designed to impress grandchildren. You help unwind the wire, fingers stiff from the cold. Each touch of the metal feels louder than it is. Your breath fogs the air. You are suddenly aware of the exact number of heartbeats between each tiny mechanical click of the timing device. In the distance, an owl calls, sounding annoyed, as if you are disturbing its night shift. When everything is in place, you back away down the embankment, into the shadow of the trees. The teacher checks his watch, then the sky, then his watch again. The train is due sometime in the next hour. The timing device is set to ignite the charges just before the engine reaches the weakest section of track. You are close enough to watch, far enough, hopefully, to survive what follows. Waiting may be the slowest kind of danger. There is nothing for your hands to do. Your thoughts pace in circles, reciting all the things that can go wrong. A patrol could come along the line. The timing device could fail. The charges could misfire and only scar the rails instead of breaking them. Historians still argue whether small sabotage actions like this, carried out by scattered groups with limited training, made a significant strategic difference, or mainly served as symbols of defiance that boosted morale more than they slowed entire armies. You shift your weight, careful not to snap a twig. The farm girl next to you stares straight ahead, jaw clenched. The mechanic taps his thumb against his knee in a silent rhythm. The teacher whispers a calm explanation of how blast waves behave, which is not actually as soothing as he seems to think it is. Then the night changes. It starts as a faint tremor under your shoes, a vibration that climbs up from the earth. Then the distant, rhythmic clatter of metal on metal, growing louder. A smudge of darkness appears on the horizon, resolving into a locomotive with a plume of smoke trailing behind it. Lights shine from the front, slicing through the night like narrow blades. You stay crouched as the train approaches, fighting the absurd urge to duck as if the driver could see the top of your head from hundreds of meters away. The train draws closer, the sound swelling, the rails humming under the strain. Cars rattle behind the engine, silhouettes of tankers and boxcars, heavy with things the occupiers consider important. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the charges do exactly what they were built to do. A flash stitches itself across the track, bright enough to burn through the dark. The blast slams into your chest as a blunt shove of air. Metal screams. The locomotive lurches as if tripped by an invisible hand. One of the front wheels jumps the track, dragging others with it. Cars concertina, grinding and shuddering. One tanker tips, another rears. A boxcar crumples like a toy stepped on by an angry child. For a moment, the night is pure noise. Then there is a terrible, ringing silence. The locomotive hisses, steam venting angrily. Somewhere, a man shouts in German. Another voice answers from further back, high with panic. You smell smoke and spilled fuel, sharp and oily. The wreck blocks the line completely. a tangle of steel and weight that will not move easily. The teacher grips your shoulder, fingers like claws. Time to go. No one needs to tell you twice. You retreat through the trees, moving fast, but not so fast you crash into branches. Adrenaline makes your legs feel both heavy and too light. The mechanic mutters a breathless joke about having just voided the warranty on that locomotive. It is ridiculous, but the laugh that bubbles up from your throat feels like a pressure valve opening. By the time you reach the bicycles, your hands are shaking so badly you fumble with the handlebars. You take one long look back. The wreck is a dark wound on the landscape, marked by flickers of fire. Somewhere, the occupiers are already planning investigations and reprisals. Somewhere else, someone will hear about a derailed train and feel a little less helpless. You push off down the path, pedals turning, heart still pounding. Tonight, you did not just carry information, you helped bend steel. You have seen how fragile machines and timetables can be when a small group of determined people nudge them at the right moment. You do not hear your name from a loudspeaker or see it printed on a notice board. It arrives on a stairwell, carried in a whisper that lands on the back of your neck like a cold hand. You are halfway up the steps of a crumbling apartment block, carrying a sack of potatoes that definitely are just potatoes this time, when a door opens on the landing above. A neighbour, the sort of person who usually comments on laundry, weather, and who is overcooking the cabbage, looks down at you, eyes wider than any vegetable emergency requires. "Do not go home," they murmur. They asked about you, the ones in leather coats. Leather coats, that is all they need to say. You keep climbing because stopping would look strange. At the top, your heart feels like it has run 3 laps around the town square. The neighbour leans close enough that you smell soap and boiled greens. "They were at your building this morning," they say. German security, with a French interpreter, questioning the concierge. They had a list. Your name was on it. The Gestapo does not work like regular soldiers. Their battlefield is stairwells, offices, kitchens, and back rooms. One plain historical fact is that by the middle years of the occupation, German security services, often with the help of French police, build thick personal files on anyone suspected of resistance activity, from schoolteachers and priests to postal workers and students. Somewhere, in a grey metal cabinet that smells of dust and cigarettes, a folder now holds your photograph, your address, little notes about how often you come and go. Your life has become paperwork with teeth. For a heartbeat, you imagine going home anyway, making coffee, sitting at your table, pretending that if you ignore men in leather coats, they will politely misfile your dossier and forget you. It is a small, stubborn fantasy, and your neighbour quietly stamps it out. "You did not hear any of this from me," they say. "You are visiting your cousin in the country. In fact, you already left yesterday." Then the door closes, as neatly as changing a line of dialogue in a play. The potatoes feel heavier. You turn and walk back down the stairs, making your footsteps sound like someone whose day is extremely dull. On the street, nothing has changed. A woman carries a baby. A boy pushes a bicycle. An old man pokes at every loose cobblestone as if they insult him personally. Nobody looks twice at you, and yet everything is different, because you now know what is written beside your name in a file you will never see. Later, when there is time to talk, the new rules arrive in calm, practical sentences. You do not sleep in the same place twice in a row. You do not take the same route to any safe location. You do not keep anything in your pockets that links you directly to a group. From now on, your days are a slow, exhausting game of musical chairs played across the whole town. Except the penalty for being caught standing is much worse than embarrassment. Across occupied France, wanted resistance learn to fade by moving between attics, barns, spare rooms, and crowded apartments, where they are just one more quiet border. Historians still argue whether the networks that hid these people were carefully organized or mostly improvised on the spot, held together with courage, gossip, and very lumpy mattresses. You begin the new life that same afternoon. The potatoes go not to your own kitchen, but to a safe address that was kept in reserve for emergencies. The concierge there barely glances at you, which is reassuring, then glances again, which is less so. Up 3 flights of stairs, along a corridor that smells of frying onions, you find a door with a tiny chalk mark near the frame. To most eyes, it is just a careless scuff. To you, it is suddenly a door that is allowed to open. Inside lives a widow who insists on giving you soup before you can finish explaining. She listens, eyes narrowed, then nods once. "You stay here tonight," she says. "Tomorrow you are someone else entirely." By someone else, she does not just mean a new name on a card. She means new habits stitched into your muscles. You learn to step off a tram one stop early and walk the rest. You learn to use shop windows as mirrors, checking whether the same face appears behind you too many times. You learn not to flinch when a German truck grinds past, because bolting into an alley would look very much like guilt. It turns out that your survival now depends on your ability to look mildly bored. There are odd, almost comic details inside this wandering life. One safe house has a parrot that mimics marching boots so convincingly it nearly gives 3 grown adults heart attacks in a single week. Another hideout is a cramped attic where someone has pinned a glamorous film poster to the wall. The actress on it becomes the silent audience for whispered plans and badly timed jokes. In one place, a huge, opinionated cat decides you belong to it and insists on sitting in your lap whenever you try to memorize new codes. The cat has very strong views about priorities, and your secret war is not on its list. Even while hunted, your body insists on ordinary things. You still queue at pumps for water and at bakeries for dark, rationed bread. You still sit in cafés with one drink you stretch for an hour, listening to the hum of talk, news filters in sideways. A raid in another district, a school searched, someone taken at dawn. People say that the Gestapo prefers early morning arrests because sleepy minds make clumsy lies. And even if no one can prove it, you notice that every knock on a door before sunrise now makes entire stairwells stop breathing. You start paying careful attention to doors, the thickness of each one, whether the key works on both sides, how far the nearest fire escape is. In a different life, you might have used this talent to be an architect, or perhaps a very efficient burglar. Now, it is simply another way your nerves stay busy while you pretend to read a newspaper. Meetings in hidden rooms grow tenser after the stairwell warning. People arrive in smaller groups. Watches are checked more often. A creak in the floor makes everyone fall silent. Your real name is used less and less, replaced by a code name that began as a joke about your handwriting and somehow stuck. It is strange the first time you hear it spoken on a stairwell and realize that the name on the file and the name in the shadows are no longer quite the same person. Eventually, someone presses a small revolver into your hand. It feels heavier than it looks. You practice with it once, in a disused quarry where the shots echo off stone and leave your ears ringing. You are told, very calmly, that this is not meant for a heroic last stand in the street. It is meant to give you one more terrible option, in a situation where every option is already bad. The joke, thin and dry, is that at least now you are officially trusted enough to be terrified in new ways. That night, in yet another borrowed bed under an unfamiliar ceiling, you lie awake and listen to the building breathe. Somewhere below, a couple argues softly about ration cards. Somewhere above, someone snores like a broken accordion. On the street, a truck passes, then another. You picture that folder with your picture in it, growing a little fatter with every rumor and report. It feels like watching your own shadow darken on a wall you cannot see. You fall asleep eventually, because exhaustion keeps winning battles your fear starts. In the morning, you get up, drink weak coffee, and step into streets where you are officially invisible and officially hunted at the same time. To anyone watching, you are just another tired face waiting for a tram that may or may not be on time. Only you know that somewhere, in a locked room full of cabinets, a thin file with your name on it has decided that you are dangerous. Somehow, that knowledge does not only frighten you, it also quietly confirms that what you are doing matters enough to be noticed. Days blur as you start measuring time not in dates, but in beds. One night in a narrow iron frame under peeling wallpaper. 2 nights on straw under a barn roof that smells of hay and old rain. A single, unforgettable night in a spare room above a butcher's shop where the smell of smoked meat seeps into your dreams. You become an expert on ceilings. You can recognize cracks and stains the way other people recognize faces. Each safe house has its own rhythm. In one apartment, the rule is absolute silence from dawn until lunch, because the concierge downstairs has ears like a hunting dog. In another, you are told to sing softly during air raids, not because anyone believes it will actually help, but because the old woman who owns the place insists music keeps fear from sticking to the walls. You sing half-remembered songs, voice shaking at first, then steadier as the sirens wail outside. Across occupied France, Thousands of ordinary people take in wanted men and women, giving them beds, meals, and new names for a night or a week. It is a plain historical fact that these helpers range from priests and farmers to postal clerks and cafe owners, often with no formal connection to any organization, just a stubborn refusal to let the occupier decide who deserves a roof. Their courage rarely appears in newsreels, but it fills attics and cellars in a quiet, relentless way. You learn to move through houses as if you are part of the furniture. Avoid windows. Do not stand silhouetted in doorways. If someone knocks unexpectedly, you go not to the obvious hiding place everyone uses in stories, but to the awkward corner no one visits unless they are looking for lost socks. One attic has a false wall, just a thin wooden panel that can swing aside to reveal a crawl space stuffed with blankets and stale air. You squeeze in once during a drill and discover that dust can tickle your throat at exactly the worst possible moment. The people who shelter you develop odd rituals around danger. In a farmhouse, the signal to hide is not shouted from room to room. It is 3 sharp knocks on the kitchen table with a wooden spoon. In a town apartment, the alarm is a particular piece of music played on the radio at the wrong time of day. You hear the first notes and move automatically toward the wardrobe, muscles already remembering where to duck. One quirky hiding place stays in your memory because of its sheer ridiculousness. In a small town near the river, a modest shop sells sewing supplies by day. Behind the counter stands a row of fabric bolts, all ordinary except for one that is hollow. When visitors arrive who must not be seen, the shopkeeper unrolls that particular bolt and reveals a narrow cavity. You slide in sideways, pressed against the wood, and she rolls the cloth back, turning you into part of the stock. The bell over the door rings. A German soldier comes in to buy buttons. He stands 3 steps from where you hold your breath and complain that the color selection is terrible. Historians still argue whether such improvised hiding places were widespread genius or rare flashes of insanity that somehow kept working in spite of their obvious flaws. There are barns too. Out in the countryside, it is easier to vanish among animals and tools. You sleep in haylofts, where mice stage tiny midnight marathons around your head. You share space with cows that regard you as a mildly confusing piece of scenery. In one barn, there is a ladder to a half floor, then a trapdoor to a smaller loft, then a hatch you can slide inside the roof itself. The farmer calls it his nesting doll hideout and seems unreasonably proud of the design. Not every safe house feels safe. Sometimes it is the people. A host who cannot stop talking, their nervous chatter spilling secrets into the air. A teenager who keeps staring at you with wide, fascinated eyes, clearly eager to tell their friends that a real resistance fighter is sleeping in the spare bed. Other times, it is the neighborhood. Too many collaborators nearby, too many eyes at windows, too many boots on the pavement at odd hours. You lie on your back, listening to your pulse, and know that if anyone knocks, you will have to climb out a rear window and leave behind everything but what fits in your head and coat pockets. There are unwritten rules among those who shelter you. They rarely ask direct questions. They feed you first, then talk business. They often press food on you to take away. Even when rations are tight, wrapping extra bread or a piece of sausage in paper, and tucking it into your bag with the same gesture they might use to tuck a scarf around a child's neck. You start to recognize the look in their eyes, a mixture of worry and pride, as if they are quietly thrilled to be helping trouble move down the road. You pay your way, not with money, but with tasks. You peel vegetables, chop wood, watch children for an afternoon while someone queues for coal. You help fix leaking roofs and squeaky doors. You mend a broken chair and tighten the screws on a loose kitchen cupboard. Somewhere along the line, your hands learn practical skills you never expected to acquire. You could probably open a small home repair business after the war if the idea of filling out tax forms did not make you want to run for the nearest hedge. Moving so often, you notice patterns in the sounds that make your muscles tense. A truck that slows instead of passing. Boots that stop outside, then scatter to the sides instead of continuing up the street. Silence after a knock that suggests more ears than voices on the other side. One evening, you are sitting at a kitchen table playing cards with a host's elderly uncle when that particular set of noises arrives. He gives you a look that is all impatience and no panic, then sweeps the cards into a drawer. Your hiding place that night is behind a tall cabinet, in a gap no wider than your shoulders. The uncle pulls the cabinet an inch further from the wall and pushes you through, then shoves it back until light narrows to a dim line. Dust and the faint smell of cabbage cling to the plaster. You hear the door open, the murmur of German and accented French. They are asking about identity cards, about radio ownership, about whether anyone unusual has been seen. The uncle complains about arthritis and the price of coal. His voice is bored, almost offended that they interrupted his evening. You realize that the best liars often sound like they cannot be bothered to lie. Later, after the visitors leave and the cabinet scrapes away from the wall, you step out feeling as if your edges have been sanded down. The uncle grunts, lights a pipe, and waves off your thanks with one hand. To him, this is just another chore, like taking out the ashes or feeding the hens. In quieter moments, you learn stories from your hosts. A nurse who forged hospital records to hide deserters among the wounded. A librarian who slipped forbidden pamphlets between the pages of popular novels. A schoolteacher who changed roll call lists to confuse whoever might later try to cross-reference them. Some of these tales are probably exaggerated, some are almost certainly true. Historians still argue whether the majority of the population sympathized with the resistance or simply tried to survive in whichever way seemed safest. But sitting at these tables, you see how messy those categories really are. You begin to understand that resistance is not just sabotage and secret meetings. It is also opening a door at the right moment, pretending not to notice when someone stays in your spare room longer than they should, lending a coat so a stranger can blend into a crowd. The safe houses you pass through are not fortresses. They are fragile shelters made of habit, courage, and thin walls. Every creak of a floorboard might be the prelude to a raid, but every creak you survive is another night the network remains unbroken. The first time you see the printing press, it looks less like a weapon and more like a stubborn machine someone forgot to dust. It sits in a damp cellar under a respectable shop, iron frame flecked with rust, wooden handle worn smooth by hands that once printed wedding notices and sale flyers. Now, it prints something very different, and that quiet change is a kind of revolution. You duck through the low doorway into air that smells of damp stone and ink. A bare bulb dangles on a wire. Stacks of paper lean in precarious columns. Metal type gleams in shallow trays. Above your head, people walk past, unaware that below their feet letters are being arranged into sentences the occupiers would rather never see. In occupied France, clandestine newspapers bloom in back rooms, garages, attics and cellars. Official papers print carefully checked news and victories that sound suspiciously tidy. In secret, resistance groups write and distribute their own sheets, telling the stories censors forbid. One clear historical fact is that by the middle of the war, dozens of underground titles circulate, some with print runs of tens of thousands, an achievement that feels unreal when you are staring at this one cramped room with its single press. The man who runs this place is short, thick in the shoulders, and wears an apron stained a shade of black that could make Cole jealous. He hands you a rag and points to a stack of metal type. Your new job is simple. You will help set lines of text, letter by tiny letter, and try not to smear ink on your face in a way that will be impossible to explain at checkpoints. You pick up a narrow metal block with a letter on one end and feel the surprising weight of it. Each character is a small piece of lead, and together they make sentences that can anger an occupying power more reliably than some rifles. You begin to understand why suspicious officials fear printers as much as partisans with explosives. Typesetting is equal parts patience and eye strain. You work from handwritten pages on a slanted desk, moving your fingers from tray to tray, picking out letters backwards so they will print the right way. At first, everything blurs into a forest of little metal teeth. You reach for the wrong drawer, reverse words, and once set a line that says turnip convoys instead of troop convoys. You get a quiet lecture about vegetables ruining emotional impact and earn your first seller laughter. The room has its own rhythm. Metal clinks as type drops into the composing stick. The press sighs and thumps when someone pulls the handle. Paper rustles while voices argue over every paragraph. A teacher corrects commas with religious conviction. A law student wants footnotes nobody will ever see. A young woman with ink on her cheek strikes out whole paragraphs and replaces them with sharper lines. Historians still argue whether these underground editorial fights improved the content or mostly delayed print runs that were already cutting dangerously close to curfew. There is room for ridiculous moments too. Someone draws moustaches on the margin portrait of a pompous collaborator being criticized in an article. During a break, you watch the printmaster try to eat a sandwich without getting ink on it, and fail so completely that you start to suspect gravity has taken sides. Your education widens. You learn how ration paper drinks ink greedily. so you adjust pressure and timing to keep letters from bleeding into smudges. One odd story the printmaster shares involves a group that ran out of paper and stole church collection envelopes, gluing them together into full sheets and turning donation requests into instruments of treason. Time rules everything here. The press runs only when street noise is loud enough to hide its rhythm. Deliveries of paper and ink are kept small, never so large that one search would reveal the full scale of the operation. The cellar has 2 exits, one up through the shop and one through a narrow tunnel that once drained water. The pages you print carry many voices, reports of real Allied victories, whispered about for days before anyone dares to put them in ink, notes on new regulations and how to quietly bend them without inviting instant arrest, instructions for subtle sabotage in factories, tiny delays that add up when repeated by many hands, short essays about dignity and the simple right to walk down a street without someone else's boots setting the rhythm. Holding these words in their raw form feels like picking up sparks. When the sheets come off the press, they must dry. You hang them on lines like laundry, rows of damp pages swaying in the cellar draft, filling the air with the sharp smell of fresh ink and wet fibre that clings to clothes and hides under fingernails. Distribution nights bring a different tension. Bundles are tied with string and packed into innocent containers. Vegetable crates and laundry baskets sit beside false-bottomed carts. You help load a bicycle with a stack that makes the frame creak. The carrier jokes that if anyone asks, they are transporting flat cabbages. It is not a great joke, but everyone laughs more than it deserves, just to loosen the knot in their stomachs. You are given a handful of copies to pass on quietly. The instructions are simple. Never give more than one to any person unless you trust they will share wisely. If someone asks where it came from, you shrug and say you found it on a bench. If anyone seems too eager, too curious about the printing itself, you make a mental note to mention their name to the person in charge. Later, holding one of the finished sheets, you run your fingers over the slightly raised ink. The headline is bold without being reckless. The language is sharp, but not hysterical. It sounds like people who refuse to pretend that lies are truth, even while surrounded by uniforms and flags they never chose. That night, lying on another borrowed mattress, you picture all the places those pages will travel. A factory locker room, a farmhouse kitchen, a tram seat where someone reads quickly, folds twice, and passes it on. Metal and rails break. Words slip through cracks. You are helping to feed a ghost that walks through walls, reminding anyone who will listen that the occupation is not as solid as it looks, and the darkness feels a little less heavy. The call for something bigger comes folded into an ordinary day. You are in that cellar again, fingertips stained with ink, when someone appears at the top of the stairs and clears their throat in a way that means the work with letters will have to wait. The printmaster waves you away, grumbling that explosives always steal the best apprentices. You wipe your hands, grab your jacket, and climb into air that smells of rain and coal smoke. The meeting place is a back room above a small garage, where the scent of oil and petrol leaks through the floorboards. On the table lies a rough map of the surrounding countryside, a curling sheet held flat by 2 wrenches and a bowl of apples. A pencil circle marks a bridge a few kilometers from town, a quiet place where a narrow road crosses a railway cutting. It is not some grand monument, just a stout piece of stonework that has seen decades of cows, carts, and bored children. Now it has been promoted to target. The plan is simple in theory. A detachment of German vehicles has been using that route as a shortcut, avoiding main roads that feel too exposed. If the bridge becomes unreliable, traffic will be forced onto other routes, where other teams can cause other problems. It is the kind of sideways strategy the resistance loves, a small push that knocks larger things off balance. One plain historical fact is that in the months leading up to major Allied operations, local groups across France focus heavily on bridges and rail junctions, trying to slow movements of troops and supplies without drawing so much attention that entire villages are wiped from the map. A man you have not met before stands by the map. His French is accented, and his clothes look like he tried to dress as a farmer after only reading about farmers in a very optimistic book. He speaks softly about plastic explosives and detonators, and makes a joke about how his employer would like every bridge in Europe to take a short holiday at the same time. You gather that he was dropped in by parachute, along with canisters of equipment, and you try not to stare at the odd combination of muddy boots and very good boot socks. The explosives you will use are indeed borrowed. They arrived in the middle of the night, packed in containers that pretended to be perfectly innocent pieces of the sky, until parachutes opened and they descended into a field. Farmers helped drag the canisters into barns, muttering about the mess they made of the cabbages. Now the grey blocks sit on the table beside the map, looking too modest for what they can do. You listen to the instructions, trying to graft each detail onto your nerves. You must place the charges on the support of the bridge that sits directly over the railway cutting. Too little force, and the damage will be cosmetic. Too much, and anyone nearby will be able to guess that this was no accident. There is a specific language to this work, careful and cold. The man with the accent talks about structural stress and controlled collapse in much the same tone a teacher might use for geometry. Historians still argue whether such highly trained agents were the main drivers of effective sabotage, or whether local groups, experimenting with whatever they could steal, achieved just as much disruption through sheer persistence. Your team for the night is small. The retired teacher, again, who now feels like a regular feature of dangerous evenings. The young mechanic, who treats wires and fuses with the same affection he gives carburetors. A farmer who knows every hedgerow within 10 kilometers and brings along a lantern wrapped in cloth. Someone jokes that the lantern is the senior member of the group, having survived more storms than the rest of you put together. You set out after dusk with a horse cart that rattles convincingly. Officially, you are transporting feed. Unofficially, the sacks under the visible layer hold coils of wire and those grey blocks that nobody must see. The horse is unimpressed by the entire operation, which is oddly comforting. It snorts at puddles and decides independently when to stop and investigate ditches. At one point, it refuses to move until the farmer bribes it with half an apple. The idea that the fate of a bridge might partly depend on an animal's opinion of road surface would be funny if it were not so accurate. The road to the bridge winds between hedges and fields. Clouds muffle the moonlight, making the world feel close and private. In the distance, you hear the faint clatter of a train, somewhere else on the vast network of rails you have already helped bruise. A light flickers briefly on a hill, then goes dark. Perhaps a farmhouse window, perhaps a signal from another group. It is hard to tell where routine ends and conspiracy begins now. You leave the cart in a dip beyond a stand of trees and proceed on foot. The bridge emerges from the dark as a squat outline, stone balustrades, and a central arch that spans the cutting. Below, the rails gleam faintly. The air smells of damp rock and old soot. You crouch by the parapet, heart knocking against your ribs, while the mechanic and the farmer unpack the charges. It is your job to climb down the embankment and position the blocks against the support. The stone is slick with moss. You move slowly, fingers finding small ledges, boots scraping dirt. You tell yourself not to look down, then look anyway, just enough to see the rails below. You think briefly of how many trains have passed along this path, carrying soldiers who probably complained about the coffee on board without realizing anyone might be waiting someday to shave away the ground under their wheels. The grey blocks fit snugly against the base of the support, attached with tape and wire in careful clusters. The mechanic hands them down to you one by one, along with lengths of fuse. You work by touch more than sight, fingers numb from cold and nerves. The stone feels ancient and indifferent, as if it does not care who tries to chip it, as long as the river keeps flowing underneath. A simple timer will trigger the detonation after you are gone. The man with the accent insisted on redundancy, so there is a backup fuse as well, coiled and ready in case the first fails. You watch the mechanic measure, cut, and attach, lips moving as he counts under his breath. It is very precise work for people whose hands are shaking. While you crouch there, pressed against the bridge, a truck approaches. You hear it first as a distant growl, then as a growing rumble that vibrates the stone. Headlights sweep along the road, washing over the parapet above you. For a moment, the underside of the bridge glows white, and you flatten yourself against the support, becoming stone, shadow, moss, anything but human. The truck passes overhead, wheels rattling, the sound booming around you. You picture a sentry leaning out to smoke and looking down with idle curiosity at the exact wrong moment. Your legs argue with your brain about whether it is acceptable to shake this much. The truck continues, engine fading. No one stops. No one shouts. The darkness stitches itself back together. You exhale very slowly, discovering that you have been holding your breath long enough to make your chest ache. The mechanic, up on the bank, lets out a quiet comment about how your face went the same color as the stone. It is not a great joke, but you laugh anyway, the sound small and strained. When everything is set, you climb back up, hands scraped and filthy, hair full of dust. The farmer kicks soil over footprints and scuffs away any mark that looks deliberate. The teacher checks the timer, then wraps it in rags and tucks it behind a stone where curious eyes are unlikely to notice. The fuses snake away from the charges, tucked into cracks and under weeds, as if the bridge is growing strange new roots. You retreat along the road, moving quickly but not so fast that anyone watching from a window would think you have just done something truly unwise. The cart waits exactly where you left it. The horse has fallen asleep standing up, in the unshakable belief that nothing interesting ever happens after dark. You climb aboard and rattle away, pretending to be people who have spent the evening arguing about hay prices. Far behind you, when you are already nearing town, there is a low, distant thud that rolls along the night like a muted drum. The sound reaches you as a soft tremor, more felt than heard. You imagine stone cracking, masonry dropping into the cutting, rails twisting just enough to make drivers nervous. Tomorrow, there will be soldiers at that bridge, gesturing angrily, measuring angles, arguing about repairs in a language that has become background noise to your days. Traffic will detour, plans will adjust. Somewhere, a staff officer will frown at a map and have to choose which route to protect, knowing there are never enough troops for everything. You go to sleep in yet another different bed, with the smell of damp stone still clinging to your hands. It occurs to you that you have learned how to hurt bridges and trains more effectively than you know how to fix a leaking roof. In a calmer world, this would be an odd career choice. In this one, it has become your trade. You think the bridge job would be enough excitement to last a month, but the war does not care about your preferred bedtime schedule. The request arrives quietly, as most dangerous requests do, in a kitchen that smells of onion soup and damp wool. A woman pours you a cup of something that wants to be coffee, then says two words that straighten your spine. Avions tombés. Downed planes. The message is simple. 2 Allied airmen came down in a field near the edge of the county. One has a bruised shoulder, the other has a cut along his hairline that makes him look as if he lost an argument with the sky. They are hiding in a hay shed, with a farmer who is brave enough to shelter them, and sensible enough to want them moved before daylight. You nod as if this is just another errand, like picking up eggs. Inside, your thoughts start running short, fast circles. Helping downed airmen is a major thread in resistance work across France. Escape lines, including famous ones like Comet and Pat O'Leary, help thousands of British and American aircrew evade capture and reach neutral Spain or return to Britain through complex chains of guides, safe houses, and forged papers. The occupiers know this, which makes the hunt for airmen both relentless and personal. To German security, each successful escape is not just a missing prisoner, but a bruise to prestige. Your part tonight is modest and terrifying. You are the local guide for the first leg. Get them out of the immediate area, away from the crash zone, away from the inevitable searches. Put them in the hands of the next link in the chain. You set out after sunset with a bicycle and a small satchel, pretending you are visiting someone in the country who makes excellent cheese. The story is flimsy, but most stories are flimsy when they are up against rifles. The road is wet from earlier rain, and the air has that clean, sharp bite that makes every sound travel further than it should. The farmer meets you at the edge of his property. He is broad-shouldered and careful, the sort of man who looks like he was born holding a pitchfork and a secret. He leads you to the shed without turning on a lantern. Inside, the airmen appear like startled ghosts. They are young, exhausted, and trying to look less terrified than they are. One of them whispers merci with an accent so thick you could spread it on bread. You resist the urge to smile, because laughter is loud and the night is full of ears. You speak slowly in French first, then broken English. You have enough to get by. The key words are universal anyway. Quiet, fast, follow me. You give them civilian jackets and caps. The clothes hang awkwardly on their frames. An airman shaped like a pilot always looks a little too confident in the shoulders, even when he is wearing a farmer's coat. You check their boots. One pair is still military issue. Not ideal. You scuff them with dirt and straw, hoping that a little mud will blur the story. Historians still argue whether the greatest strength of these escape efforts was the formal planning of organized networks, or the spontaneous courage of local villagers who made quick, risky choices without ever meeting a boss of the resistance. Tonight, the distinction feels academic. What matters is that 5 people in a farm shed are about to bet their lives on quiet footsteps. The route you choose avoids the main road and the railway cutting, moving instead through hedgerows and fields. The countryside is a patchwork of darkness, the kind that makes you feel both sheltered and exposed. You lead single file, with the uninjured airman in the middle and the bruised one behind you so you can pace him. Every few minutes, you stop to listen. You hear an engine far away, a dog, the faint, metallic clink of a gate swinging somewhere in the distance. Each sound arrives with a question attached. Is it ordinary? Is it aimed at you? At a narrow stream, you help the injured airman step across stones, slick with algae. He nearly slips, catches himself, and mutters something that is not likely suitable for church. You pretend you did not understand it. This is the polite international language of wartime cooperation. Halfway through the fields, you encounter the night's first truly absurd obstacle. A cow that has decided to stand directly in your path like a stubborn security guard, with 4 legs and no interest in ideology. You wave your hands, whisper at it, even attempt a dignified shoo. The cow stares back with the indifference of a creature that believes politics is a human hobby. The injured airman looks at you as if to ask whether French cows are always this committed to sabotage. You guide the men around it, stepping through wet grass. The cow remains unmoved. For the rest of your life, you will probably remember this as the night you were temporarily outmaneuvered by livestock. You reach a small village at the edge of the woods. Lights are low, curtains are drawn. You pause in the shadow of an apple tree while the airmen catch their breath. Their faces are pale in the starlight. You can feel their trust settling on you, heavy and fragile. You have become, for these 2 strangers, the difference between a path forward and a prison camp. You remind them of the rules. If stopped, they are Belgian labourers returning from a repair job. They speak as little as possible. The uninjured one nods eagerly, as if he is about to ace an exam. The injured one looks like a man trying to remember a lie while his body begs for sleep. Your safe house sits behind a bakery that smells too wonderful for the times you live in. A woman opens the door just enough to see your face, and the quick lantern signal you flash from your pocket. She ushers you inside, then closes the door with a soft final click. In the back room, she gives the airmen water and a thin stew. They eat like people who have been running on fear and adrenaline for days. One of them pauses after the first spoonful, eyes widening, and says something delighted about it being the best food he has ever tasted. The woman looks both proud and amused. You have a hunch that if he had been served boiled shoe leather, he would have praised its excellent texture. The bakery owner joins you by the window. He speaks quietly about searches already starting near the crash area. German patrols and French police have questioned 2 farmers and checked barns along the road. It is the usual pattern. The occupiers understand that airmen rarely travel alone. They look for the chain. You do not stay long. The longer you remain clustered, the more dangerous the cluster becomes. The next link in the escape line is due before dawn. A man with forged papers and a cart that will carry the airmen toward a larger town where they can disappear into the noise of trains and markets. Before you leave, the injured airman grips your wrist with surprising strength. "Thank you," he says. It is such a small sentence for such a massive risk that it briefly knocks the breath out of you. You step back into the night, pulling your collar up against the cold. The village is quiet, but the quiet has weight now. You walk your bicycle along the lane instead of riding it, keeping your silhouette low. A patrol could appear at any corner, and you do not want to be the person who looks like they are racing against sunrise. On your way out, you pass the bakery window and catch your own reflection. You look ordinary, tired, slightly damp around the hair. You also look like someone who just did something that could earn a death sentence on the wrong day in front of the wrong officer. You pedal into the dark with the faint smell of fresh bread still clinging to your jacket. Somewhere behind you, 2 airmen sleep in stolen safety for a few hours. Somewhere ahead, the network tightens its grip on the night and pulls them forward, one careful step at a time. You tell yourself to focus on the road, on the soft whir of bicycle tires over damp earth, on the fact that you are still breathing. For now, that is enough. The cafe on the square looks harmless in daylight. A few tables, a chalkboard menu, a tired awning that has seen better summers. The sort of place where old men argue about football and young couples pretend they are not holding hands. Tonight, it feels like a trap dressed in politeness. You arrive just after dusk, wearing the sort of coat that makes you look like a person whose biggest crime is owning one sock that never finds its pair. The square is busy enough to provide cover, quiet enough that every laugh sounds slightly forced. A German notice board stands near the fountain, layered with new rules and old threats. The paper edges curl in the cold like dried leaves. You are not here for pleasure. You are here because someone you trust told you the contact will be here, and because sometimes the resistance has to use public spaces. Precisely because the enemy expects secrets to hide only in forests and cellars. One mainstream historical fact that hangs over every table like invisible smoke is that German security services and collaborationist police rely heavily on informants. Some are ideological, some are desperate, some are simply paid. A single tip can unravel a chain that took months to build. You choose a seat with a clear view of the entrance and a second view of a side alley. You order a drink you do not want in a voice that suggests mild irritation at the state of the world. The cup arrives with a smell that hints at coffee in the way a postcard hints at a vacation. Your spoon clinks against the porcelain with a sound you instantly regret. You wait. The signal is supposed to be simple. A man will enter with a folded newspaper and ask for a light, even if he is not smoking. You will answer that the wind is inconvenient tonight, even if there is no wind. It is the kind of code that sounds like theatre. But theatre is useful when you need words that can be repeated later without people realizing they mattered. The door opens. A man steps inside, mid-30s, neat hair, clean shoes that look too expensive for ration times. He carries a newspaper. He scans the room with a quick, practiced sweep, then walks toward the counter. Your pulse steadies. This looks right. He orders, takes his drink, then turns and walks toward your table. And then the night tilts. Because he is not alone. Two men enter just behind him, and they do not try to look casual. Their coats are long, their posture firm, their eyes already measuring the room by threats instead of social manners. One is German, the other wears a French uniform with the inflated confidence of someone who has chosen the winning side, at least in his own imagination. You have a brief, strangely calm thought that your face is about to become a bullet point in someone else's report. The contact pauses beside your table and says quietly, "A light?" His accent is slightly off. His eyes avoid yours. The line sounds rehearsed, not natural. It is a subtle difference, but in this work, subtle differences are the difference between walking home and disappearing. You do not answer the code phrase. Instead, you lift your cup and take a slow sip, buying a second of time. The drink is terrible. This is not the moment you wanted to discover how loyal you can be to bad beverages. The German takes 2 steps into the room and stops, scanning faces. The Frenchman follows his gaze, like a dog taught the rules of hunting. The waiter freezes with a tray halfway to the next table. Your mind does something fascinating under pressure. It becomes both very fast and extremely petty. You notice that the Frenchman's boots are over-polished. You notice that the contact has a new watch that looks like it was bought with someone else's conscience. You set the cup down. You stand with a small sigh. "I was just leaving," you say, in French. The tone of someone who has decided the cafe chairs are too uncomfortable to tolerate. You start walking toward the door at a pace that is not hurried. Not hurried is your religion now. The German turns his head slightly. His eyes land on you. The Frenchman shifts one foot, angling to cut you off. This is the point where fear tries to climb into your throat. You do not let it. You keep your expression neutral, almost bored. If you were any more casual, you might start complaining about the price of bread. "Your papers," the Frenchman says. You reach into your coat slowly, without fumbling. People who fumble look guilty. People who move too smoothly look trained. You aim for the wonderful middle zone of mild irritation. You hand over your identity card. The Frenchman studies it longer than he needs to. He is the kind of man who enjoys the sensation of power the way other men enjoy a good dessert. The German glances at the card, then at your face, then past you as if already deciding your value against the effort of paperwork. Historians still argue whether most betrayals within the resistance came from ideological collaborators or from people pressured by fear, money, or blackmail. Standing here, you do not care about the academic breakdown. You care that your lungs are quietly counting seconds. The Frenchman asks where you are going. You give your cover story, short and plain. An errand, a relative, nothing dramatic. You do not add extra detail. You do not paint a landscape. You keep it as dull as windowless arithmetic. He narrows his eyes. The German says something low in his language. The Frenchman nods, then hands your card back. "Go," he says. You do not thank him. Thanking him would suggest he did you a favor rather than failing to prove something. You step outside into the square, the night air hitting your face like a reset button. Your legs want to sprint. Your brain says no. You walk. You become a person who left a cafe because the drink was bad, and the conversation was worse. You turn left, then right, taking the long route that circles the square, rather than heading directly toward any safe location. You pass a stall where an old woman is packing up wilted vegetables. You nod politely. You are a very normal citizen with absolutely no plans. If someone handed out awards for this performance, you would accept yours with a humble shrug. Behind you, the cafe door opens again. Footsteps. 2 sets. Not running. Not yet. You reach a corner where a narrow alley cuts between buildings like a seam. You slip in, still not rushing. Then you pause behind a stack of crates and listen. The footsteps pass the alley mouth. A low conversation follows. You catch a few words in French about the square, about checking the side streets. The tone is impatient, the way people sound when they want results before dinner. You wait until the sound fades. Then you move, not back toward any known safe house, not toward the cellar press, not toward any friend whose kindness would become evidence. Tonight, your best survival tactic is randomness. You cross through a small service yard, hop a low wall, and land in a lane that smells of damp laundry and cooking fat. You keep your head down. You keep your breath quiet. You pass a shuttered shop and think, with a flicker of dark humor, that this might be the worst possible night to look suspiciously athletic. At a second intersection, a bicycle leans against a post. You hesitate 1 heartbeat, then take it. Borrowing without permission is normally rude. Under occupation, it becomes a community contribution program that nobody advertises. You pedal slowly, the tires making soft, forgiving sounds on the wet stones. A patrol truck rumbles somewhere in the distance. You turn again, then again, letting instinct and luck braid into a route that even you could not easily retrace. When you finally stop, it is in a quiet street far from the square. A modest apartment door opens after a cautious signal. The occupant does not ask what happened. They see it in your face. Inside, you sit at a small table and let the adrenaline drain away. Your hands tremble. The host sets down a bowl of soup and says, with the dry practicality of someone who has lived too long in dangerous times, that you look like a man who just discovered cafés can be hazardous to health. You manage a quiet laugh. The betrayal at the square does not end your work, but it changes your posture toward the world. You now know the enemy is not only men in uniforms. It is also the too neat watch, the avoided eye contact, the rehearsed line delivered 1/2 second too late. You eat the soup slowly, feeling the night settle back into your bones. Somewhere, a file will gain new notes. Somewhere, the man with the newspaper will collect his reward or his reassurance. Somewhere, you will have to decide how long a name can remain useful before it becomes dangerous. For now, you are alive. You are hidden. You are learning that in this war of shadows, even a cafe chair and a bad cup of pretend coffee can become part of the battlefield. You leave the town in the most unromantic way possible, which is exactly how survival prefers to be handled. No dramatic farewell, no heroic speech, just a quiet shift in direction, while the streets still pretend to be ordinary. Your coat is plain. Your shoes are scuffed. Your face is set to the expression of someone thinking about nothing more dangerous than a stubborn grocery list. The forest waits beyond the last row of houses, dark and patient. By the time you reach the tree line, the air feels different, cooler, wetter, alive with small sounds that the city forgets to hear. Leaves whisper against each other, twigs snap under unseen feet. The earth smells of moss and old rain. You step off the road and into the undergrowth, following a narrow path that is not really a path so much as a series of choices made by people who learn to avoid being seen. The Maquis are not a single unit with matching uniforms. They are a scattered, growing constellation of guerrilla groups in rural France, living in woods, hills, and remote farms. One mainstream historical fact is that these groups expand significantly after 1943, when the Vichy regime's forced labor program pushes many young men to evade conscription for work in Germany by fleeing into the countryside. Many of them become maquisards, and their numbers swell as the war continues. You meet them near a clearing that smells faintly of wood smoke, the kind of smell that clings to hair and fabric and tells the world more than you would like. A sentry emerges from behind a tree, rifle held low, eyes sharp. He looks at you for a long moment, then nods toward the clearing with the cautious approval of someone who has decided you are probably not a walking disaster. The camp is simple and clever. Tents made from patched fabric, bedrolls tucked under pine boughs, a cooking fire set in a shallow pit with stones arranged to muffle light. A lookout point higher up the slope, where two men watch the road with the sleepy intensity of cats pretending they do not care about anything. A woman with cropped hair and an expression that suggests she has never tolerated nonsense in her life gestures you closer. She asks your name. You give the one you are using now. She accepts it with a small nod that implies your real biography is none of her business. Your first night in the forest is an education in discomfort. The ground is hard, the air grows cold and damp. Your blanket is thin. Wind finds gaps in everything. You discover that sleeping outdoors is less a heroic experience and more a negotiation with roots. If anyone ever tells you that the Maquis lifestyle is glamorous, they are either lying or trying to sell you a rugged camping holiday. Food is simple. Soup thickened with whatever can be found or traded. Bread that tastes like patience. A few slices of sausage passed around with solemn fairness. Someone produces a tin of sardines like it is treasure. You eat slowly, listening to the cadence of voices around the fire. They speak of patrol patterns, supply shortages, and which farmhouse can hide 3 men without raising suspicion. The forest has its own rules of secrecy. Fires are kept small, conversations stay low. Movement after dusk is done in pairs. A single bird call can be a signal. One quirky tidbit you learn quickly is how much of the camp's communication borrows from the natural world. A particular owl imitation means danger. A short series of whistles means approach. Someone jokes that the birds are basically on the payroll, though the birds have not been informed. In the morning, training begins with the kind of practical brutality that makes you grateful you have legs that still function. You practice moving silently through brush. You learn how to set up an ambush site without leaving a messy signature for anyone to spot. The mechanic from earlier circles of your life appears here too, as if the forest has a habit of collecting the most useful people. Weapons are a patchwork. A few rifles, a couple of pistols, ammunition counted like coins. Some supplies come from captured stock, some from airdrops coordinated by allied contacts, some, surprisingly, from sheer improvisation. You hear an anecdote about a group that once disguised a weapons cache inside hollowed firewood logs stacked neatly beside a farmhouse wall. The occupiers walked past them, complaining about winter fuel shortages, unaware they were leaning on a small arsenal. Historians still argue whether the Maquis made their greatest strategic impact through direct combat, or through the psychological pressure they placed on German forces forced to guard roads, bridges, and supply lines across an increasingly hostile countryside. Sitting here, with your boots wet and your stomach half full, you suspect both explanations enjoy the truth. Your new role is not to charge down hills blazing away like an action hero. Your role is to survive, observe, and contribute without becoming the weak link. You help with logistics, moving bundles of food between hidden points. You stand watch on a ridge and learn every shade of darkness. You practice disassembling and cleaning a rifle with fingers that are still clumsy at the task. Someone teases that your weapon maintenance looks like you are negotiating with a cranky clock. You do not deny it. Ambush planning becomes the camp's quiet art. The leader sketches road curves in the dirt with a stick. You study where vehicles naturally slow, where hedgerows create blind corners, where retreat routes vanish into the trees. The plan is always to strike fast, then disappear before reinforcements arrive. The forest is not just a home, it is a camouflage system with 1,000 exits. On a patrol walk, you witness another odd survival trick. To confuse trackers, one man suggests stepping backward for a short stretch along a muddy track, so footprints appear to head in the opposite direction. It sounds like the kind of clever nonsense a bored teenager might invent. Then you try it and realize it is both awkward and weirdly effective. The joke that follows is that if the war goes on long enough, everyone will be excellent at walking in ways that ruin their posture. You also learn the politics of trust. The Maquis do not accept everyone instantly. New arrivals are watched gently but closely. A careless question about names can freeze a conversation. A habit of wandering alone is quietly corrected. There is no room for ego here. The forest may be big, but safety is fragile. One afternoon, a radio operator crouches under a tarp with headphones pressed tight to his ears. The camp falls silent while he listens for coded messages. The radio crackles like a fireplace full of ghosts. He writes down a short phrase and passes it to the leader. The phrase is not poetic at all, which is good. Poetry would be suspicious. The message suggests an upcoming supply drop in a nearby field. The mood lifts in that subtle way humans understand instinctively. Hope is not loud here. It is practical. Hope looks like more bandages, more bullets, and maybe a tin of actual coffee that does not taste like it was brewed from regret. At night, you lie on your back under a sky sharply littered with stars. The world above is indifferent and beautiful. The world below is tense and muddy. You think about how easy it would be to feel lost out here, and how the camp's quiet routines keep everyone anchored. Someone nearby snores with impressive confidence, as if danger is a rumor that annoys him. You admire this talent and wonder if it can be taught. The forest does not erase your fear. It reshapes it. In town, fear is tight corners and stairwells. Here it is distance and silence. It is the possibility of headlights cutting through trees. It is the knowledge that you can run, but you can also get turned around in the dark and end up sprinting heroically into a bush that does not share your priorities. By the end of your first week, you stop thinking of the marquee as a temporary hideout. It becomes a living strategy, a community of hardened patience, a place where resistance is not just an action, but a lifestyle built from wet boots, careful whispers, and the stubborn belief that the occupier should never feel fully safe on French soil. You close your eyes with the smell of pine in your lungs and smoke in your clothes, and while sleep is never deep, it is enough. For now, the forest holds you in its shadowed hands, and you learn how to become part of the landscape that refuses to be conquered. The forest teaches you to sleep with one ear open, but tonight both ears are wide awake. The camp is quieter than usual, not because anyone has suddenly become better at silence, but because everyone is listening for the same invisible thing. A message. The radio operator sets up under a tarp just after sunset. He keeps the set wrapped in cloth until the last moment, as if hiding it from the night itself. You crouch nearby with a tin cup of weak soup, watching his hands move with the careful speed of someone diffusing a spider. The little box of wires and dials looks unimpressive for something that can change the rhythm of an entire region. One mainstream historical fact sits behind every breath you take here. In the months leading to the Allied landings, resistance groups across France prepare for coordinated sabotage and disruption, guided by radio instructions, coded phrases, and supply drops. The idea is to delay German reinforcements, damage railways and communications, and turn Invasion Week into a logistical nightmare. But the moment before such a storm does not feel grand. It feels like waiting in damp boots while your stomach wonders if it can file a formal complaint. The operator adjusts the frequency. Static blooms and fades. A thin voice emerges from the noise, then slips away again. You look up through the trees at a sky that is barely visible, a darker shade of dark stitched between branches. The air smells of pine and cold smoke. People gather in small clusters, not too close to the radio, not too far either. The leader stands with arms folded and a face that looks carved from patience. A younger fighter keeps bouncing his heel against the ground until someone quietly tells him that anxiety is loud and the earth already has enough vibrations. You do not talk much. You listen. The broadcast arrives in short waves, carefully timed, like the world's most dangerous bedtime story. You catch scraps of familiar French, phrases that sound harmless if you do not know what they really mean. The operator writes quickly in a notebook that will never be shown in daylight. A line about the long socks of the gardener, another about the wheat ripening early, then a phrase that sounds like it belongs in a poem someone would refuse to publish. The leader leans in. The operator taps the paper once. This is it. The coded message does not say the invasion is coming because that would be wonderfully convenient for everyone who wants you dead. It says something banal and oddly beautiful, and the meaning is assigned in advance. You feel your throat tighten. Around you, men and women exchange quick glances that carry more information than spoken sentences. No cheering, no triumphant fist in the air. The range of emotion here stays controlled, like a fire kept under a heavy lid. Historians still argue whether the resistance could have achieved this level of coordination without Allied radio support, or whether disparate local groups would have remained mostly isolated acts of defiance without that larger strategic spine. Tonight, the argument is not yours to solve. Your job is to move. The leader assigns tasks in a low voice. A small team will cut telephone lines. Another will prepare roadblocks in 2 key valleys. A third will watch a nearby rail junction for a chance to strike at a signal box. You are placed with a group tasked to support sabotage on a rural road that feeds into a larger highway. It is a surprisingly unglamorous assignment, which is perfect. The most effective disruption often looks like a boring problem a harried officer wishes he could ignore. You packed lightly: a blanket, a bit of bread, a small medical kit, a few tools that could pass for farm supplies if someone squints generously. You check your pockets twice, then a third time, because nerves also love bureaucracy. The forest around the camp seems to hold its breath as you set out. You move in pairs, stepping around wet roots and low ferns. A night insect hums somewhere close enough to annoy you, far enough to stay alive. The path descends toward rough farmland, where hedgerows carve the landscape into dark compartments. You reach a small outbuilding before midnight. It is a shepherd's shed abandoned for the season, its door hanging slightly crooked. Inside, the floor is packed dirt. You and your companions settle into a tense wait. Someone whispers a joke about how the shed is so charming it should be listed as a romantic getaway. You nearly snort, then remember that comedy remains a high-risk sport here. The joke does its job anyway. It loosens your jaw enough to breathe. The plan is to watch the road, confirm the timing of any German movement, and assist with demolition if the primary team needs hands. There is a culvert under the road that can be collapsed. It will not destroy a convoy outright, but it will slow vehicles enough to force detours and create jam points where other teams can strike. You begin the long, quiet vigil. Time stretches. The night air cools the sweat on your back. You chew a piece of bread that tastes like flour and stubbornness. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a fox barks. Someone else in the shed mutters that even the wildlife sounds like it is filing complaints about the occupiers. A truck passes at 1:30, alone, headlights muted. You do not move. Another passes later, 2 vehicles this time, their engines sounding heavier, more purposeful. The leader in your small group makes a mark in the dirt with a stick, a simple log of movement. The radio phrase keeps repeating in your mind. The invasion is not a rumor now. It is a probability turning into a schedule. At around 3, you hear the first truly significant movement. Multiple engines, low and synchronized. The sound is distant but growing. You slip out of the shed with the others, crouching by the hedgerow. A column of vehicles approaches. You can make out silhouettes of trucks, possibly half-tracks, the dull shapes of tarps and equipment. They move steadily, not rushing, which suggests confidence. Confidence is a wonderful weakness when the road beneath you is about to become a problem. You transmit a brief signal with a small flashlight reduced to a pinprick of light, a prearranged pattern aimed toward a ridge where another pair of eyes waits. The light is tiny. Your heart feels huge. The convoy passes your position without stopping. You count vehicles under your breath, then stop counting when you realize you are doing it too loudly in your own head. When the last truck disappears into the distance, you exhale. The primary sabotage team will likely strike further along, at the culvert site. Your role will be to assist afterward, or to misdirect any immediate response. You wait again, and then, faintly, you hear a sound that is not engine noise. A dull, controlled boom. Not close enough to shake the ground under your feet, but close enough to confirm that the plan is moving forward. You feel a surge of relief so sharp it is almost giddy. You do not celebrate. You simply become more alert, because the aftermath is where mistakes get punished. Minutes later, you hear shouting in German carried by the night wind. Engines rev. A vehicle tries to reverse, then another. The road has become a puzzle with missing pieces. Your companion whispers a second joke. Something about how the German drivers have just discovered the local road maintenance budget is extremely enthusiastic this year. It is not a masterpiece of humor, but it lands. Your small group shifts to the next phase. You drag fallen branches into a side lane, not to block it completely but to slow any quick detour. You scuff the ground to blur footprints. You move a simple signpost, turning an arrow slightly so that in the half-light it points toward a less efficient route. It is petty sabotage at its finest, the kind of low-effort mischief that, when multiplied across a region, can make an army suddenly feel clumsy. At dawn's edge, you retreat toward the forest. The sky lightens to a thin grey, and birds begin to sing, as if the world has not just tilted toward one of its biggest moments. Their normality feels almost rude. As you climb back into cover, you understand something new about this part of the war. The night before the invasion is not just about dramatic countdowns and heroic poses. It is about thousands of small hands doing small, sharp tasks in the dark, turning roads and rails into questions the occupiers cannot answer quickly enough. You reach the tree line with your lungs full of cold air and your mind full of careful urgency. Whatever storm is coming from the sea, the land is already shifting to meet it. The first sign that the world is about to flip is not a trumpet blast or a dramatic speech. It is a ripple of rumors moving faster than bicycles. You hear it in a market line where people suddenly stop complaining about potatoes long enough to whisper about Allied forces drawing closer. You hear it in a workshop where a mechanic who normally treats every day like an exhausting chore suddenly smiles for no reason. You hear it in the way German patrols start moving with tighter shoulders, as if they can feel the ground changing under their boots. You are with the Marquis when the order comes to push from sabotage into open disruption. The forest has been your teacher in patience. Now it graduates you into speed. You slip into town at dawn, not as a lone shadow but as part of a loose, fast-forming tide. The streets are still grey with leftover night. Windows are shut. The air is cool enough to sting your lungs. Somewhere, someone starts ringing a church bell far earlier than any sensible schedule allows. The bell is not just a bell anymore. It is a signal, an alarm, a heartbeat. In many parts of France, during the summer of 1944, local resistance units and the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur rise to harass retreating German forces, seize key buildings, and hold streets until Allied troops arrive. That is the mainstream historical shape of this moment. It is messy and uneven by region, but the pattern is real. The occupiers are no longer a permanent weight. They are a force trying to survive the collapse of their own timetable. You move with a small group toward the square. The same kind of square that once held only markets and gossip. Today it holds tension so thick you could almost slice it into ration-sized portions. Barricades appear in places that seem chosen by instinct. A tipped cart. Stacks of crates. A pile of paving stones yanked from the street by hands that have been waiting for this moment for years. Someone drags a heavy cafe table into the road with the determination of a person who has finally found the perfect use for terrible furniture. A young man in a threadbare jacket hands you a rifle that looks as if it has a longer memory than anyone holding it. The metal is cold, the wood is scarred, the weapon is not glamorous. It is practical history. You take position behind a barricade built from a broken wagon and a pile of sandbags that smell of damp fabric and old flour. Beside you, a woman with a red scarf ties her hair back as if preparing for a long day of washing laundry, not fighting an occupying army. The calmness in her hands makes you feel both steadier and slightly embarrassed about how loud your own pulse sounds in your ears. The first exchange of fire is sudden and chaotic. A German vehicle rolls into the street, expecting obedience and receiving something else entirely. Shots crack, glass shatters, someone yells to keep low. The air fills with a sharp smell of cordite and dust. You are not trying to be a cinematic hero. You are trying to be a sensible human who keeps breathing. The rhythm of street fighting is exhausting. Bursts of action, then long, straining quiet. You peek around a corner and see a German soldier duck behind a doorway, his face pale under the helmet, young enough to make you think of the bakery line and how absurd this whole war has always been. The thought does not soften your resolve, it sharpens it. A quirky detail slips into your mind, almost against your will. In some towns, resistance fighters use improvised signals that sound ridiculous in peacetime. A child's whistle tuned to a specific pattern, a church bell rung in a rhythm that marks which street is safe, a laundry line strung across an alley that looks like a domestic annoyance, but actually blocks visibility for anyone advancing. The ordinary objects of daily life become tactical tools, and the creativity of it all would be impressive if the stakes were not so terrifying. Historians still argue whether these local uprisings shortened the occupation in a meaningful military sense, or mainly served as a symbolic reclaiming of dignity that mattered just as much as any tactical advantage. You suspect the answer is both, because you are watching people reclaim streets that once belonged to fear. In the early afternoon, you help move messages between barricades. Your old training returns, but now the danger is loud and public. You run hunched through a side lane, past a shuttered bakery, past a doorway where two men patch a wound with hands that are far steadier than yours feel. You deliver a short update about ammunition and positions. Someone tries to offer you a cigarette. You decline, not because you are virtuous, but because the last thing you need is to announce your location with a tiny glowing beacon of anxiety. A German mortar round lands somewhere 2 streets away, shaking dust from balconies. People flinch, then recover. A man behind you mutters that the occupiers are clearly upset about the local urban renewal project. It is a thin joke, but it lands anyway. Humor is what you do when your body needs one more reason to keep functioning. By late afternoon, the soundscape of the town changes again. Bells, shouts, scattered gunfire, and then a new layer of noise rolling in from the outskirts. Engines. Many engines. The first Allied vehicles appear at the far end of the main road, half obscured by smoke and distance. The sight hits you like a sudden wave of heat. People spill from doorways. Someone climbs a lamppost to wave a tricolour flag that seems to appear out of nowhere, as if it had been hidden inside the town itself, waiting for the right breath of air. The German forces begin to pull back. Not all at once, not gracefully. Some retreat in tight groups, some break into smaller units. A few still fire from cover. The occupation does not vanish with a polite bow. It recedes in anger and exhaustion. The strangest sound of the day arrives not as gunfire but as cheering. It is messy, uneven, and loud enough to make you worry it might summon trouble all over again. People shout names. People cry. An old woman kisses the cheek of a resistance fighter who looks so startled you suspect he has never been kissed by anyone that determined in his life. A boy waves a flag so hard he nearly topples over. Someone jokes that the town may need a new arm day routine after all this victory waving. Then the darker edge of liberation emerges. You see a knot of people dragging a man toward the square, his face bruised, his eyes darting. Accusations fly. Collaboration. Informing. Helping the occupiers. The crowd's rage is raw, the kind that has been stored too long. You are not asked to judge. You are asked to stand, watch, and keep the moment from tipping into chaos. This is the part no one puts on neat posters. Victory has a shadow. You help separate a few people, guiding them away from the worst crush. Your voice stays low and firm. The goal is not to erase anger, but to keep it from becoming another kind of ruin. As evening approaches, the town settles into a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The air still smells of smoke, but now it is threaded with something else. Fresh bread baking openly again, the kind of smell that makes the future feel possible. A cafe opens its shutters and serves real coffee to anyone who can produce a cup. You take one sip and nearly laugh at how normal pleasure can feel so unfamiliar. You stand near the square as Allied troops coordinate with local fighters. The uniforms are different, the accents are different, the relief is universal. You watch the occupiers disappear down the road and realize that the danger is not over, but the shape of it has changed. Tonight, you walk through streets that are still scarred and still noisy, but no longer owned by someone else. You breathe in cool air and let the sound of bells and tired laughter settle into your bones. For the first time in a long time, you allow yourself to believe that survival might finally start to look like living. Liberation does not arrive as a clean reset button. It arrives as exhaustion with a flag tied to it. You wake in a borrowed room that is suddenly yours again because the word borrowed has started to lose its meaning. The window is open. The air smells of wet stone, smoke that is finally thinning, and the first honest bread you have tasted in years. Down on the street, people are already moving with that strange, half-joyful, half-stunned energy of a town that has survived a storm and is now checking what parts of the roof are still attached. You walk out early, because sleep now feels like a luxury you forgot how to trust. The square is scarred but alive. The barricades are being dismantled piece by piece, as if everyone is quietly agreeing to return the streets to civilian life before the streets start getting ideas. This is where the danger changes shape. The uniforms around you are friendlier, but the questions are heavier. Who helped whom? Who betrayed whom? Who will be trusted to run the town hall when the old order comes back to life? One mainstream historical fact that becomes impossible to ignore is that after liberation, France enters a turbulent period of reckoning. Some collaborators face formal trials. Others face rough justice in public moments that are fast, emotional, and not always orderly. You are asked to give statements. A simple sentence about where you were on a certain night can lift one person into honor and drop another into disgrace. You discover that the war keeps asking you to be brave in new ways. It is one thing to sabotage a line or guide a stranger through darkness. It is another to speak clearly in daylight, when the people listening are hungry for certainty that you cannot always provide. The town tries to look forward while also staring into the mirror. You see a barber sweeping up glass, a schoolteacher pinning a new notice to a door, a priest checking on families who have not yet returned. The quiet heroes of survival begin to emerge in the open, blinking at sunlight like people leaving a long movie theater. A quirky tidbit circulates in the arguments and relief of these days. Someone claims that an old municipal stamp, hidden in a flour barrel for years, reappears intact and is used to certify the first official documents of the newly freed local administration. The story may be partly exaggerated, but the symbol fits. Even the tools of bureaucracy seem eager to come back home. You take a walk beyond the centre, toward the edge of town, where the rubble is thinner and the fields are starting to look like fields again. Your body still reacts to sudden sounds. A truck backfiring makes you duck behind a wall out of pure muscle memory. A child sees you do it and giggles. You give him a stern look that fails entirely because your face has forgotten how to be convincingly stern about anything trivial. 3 light jokes land around you in the span of an hour. One man claims the occupation taught him to stretch soup so well he could now feed an entire regiment with 1 onion and a frustrated stare. Another says the Germans will be heartbroken to discover the locals have resumed the illegal activity of smiling in public. A woman loudly announces that her first act of freedom is to stop pretending the coffee substitute ever counted as a beverage. You silently agree with the highest possible endorsement. Historians still argue whether the resistance should be remembered primarily as a unified national movement or as many local efforts with different motives that only later became a single story. Walking these streets, you feel how complicated that truth really is. You know how many different kinds of courage live side by side. The ink-stained hands, the farm hands, the hands that simply opened a door and said nothing. The days after liberation bring paperwork again, but now it is the paperwork of rebuilding, lists of missing people, requests for ration revisions, plans to repair bridges and rails. You watch engineers and labourers measure damage with the determined calm of people who are too tired for despair. You also notice the quiet cost of survival. Some people who helped you will never boast about it. They will go back to their shops and gardens as if nothing extraordinary ever happened in their spare rooms. Others will carry private grief that no victory parade can mend. The war does not end cleanly inside the human heart. When evening comes, you find yourself near the river, where the water keeps moving with the steady indifference of nature that has watched empires rise and fall without needing to comment. You sit on a low wall and let your shoulders relax. Now the pace slows. You breathe in, and the air feels softer than it did in the years of constant hiding. The twilight settles over the town in gentle layers. The rooftops are dark silhouettes again, but not the threatening kind. The kind that belong to home. You allow your mind to drift through simple images. A loaf cooling on a windowsill, a bicycle leaning against a fence, a schoolyard that will soon be loud with ordinary complaints. The future returns not as a grand speech, but as a collection of small, believable mornings. You remind yourself that living is not a lesser version of courage. It is its own long mission. The river murmurs. Somewhere behind you, a door closes softly. Somewhere ahead, a train will run a route that is no longer shaped by fear. You let that thought settle into you like warm light. Your body is tired in the deep, honest way that follows survival. Your eyes grow heavy. Your breathing evens out. You are here. You made it. And for tonight, that is enough.